All right. Thank you all for standing by and welcome to our webinar entitled A HABS Primer. This is a webinar series called Freshwater Science that highlights Ohio Sea Grant and partnering scientists every month. Every quarter is a different focus, from human health and fish farming to harmful algal blooms and human decision-making, bringing applied research to the public on issues that affect our Lake Erie communities. I am Jill Gentis-Banicki from Ohio Sea Grant, and joining me today is Dr. Chris Winslow, Director of Ohio Sea Grant and Stone Laboratory. Dr. Chris Winslow has been with Ohio Sea Grant and Stone Laboratory since 2012 and as director for the past 9 years. He received his bachelor's from Ohio University, sorry, Chris, Ohio University, and both his master's and PhD from Bowling Green State University, where he was an instructor for 7 years. Dr. Winslow, prior to coming to Sea Grant, was also an assistant professor at Kutztown University in Pennsylvania. As Ohio Sea Grant's director, Dr. Winslow has helped lead the Harmful Algal Bloom Research Initiative with the University of Toledo. Funded by the Ohio Department of Higher Education, this state initiative has funded over $24 million, 97 projects toward harmful algal bloom research across Ohio. He is also helping lead the Lake Erie and Aquatic Research Network, a consortium of Ohio universities and state agencies, which is currently working on wetland monitoring across the state as part of the Governor DeWine's H2 Ohio initiative. We're delighted to have Dr. Winslow here today to talk everything about Lake Erie HABs before the NOAA forecast next week. Before we do start, just a few logistical issues with the webinar. During our presentation, all participants will be in a listen-only mode. Afterwards, around 12:20, I will conduct a question and answer session. If you would like to ask a question anytime during Dr. Winslow's presentation, please feel free to pull up that chat feature located at the bottom of your screen, and I'll collect and pose your questions out to Dr. Winslow at the end of his presentation. As a reminder, this webinar has auto captioning and is being recorded to be posted on our website for later viewing. Also, we will post a webinar survey in the chat feature toward the end of the half an hour, so please take a few minutes after the webinar to fill out that survey. It always helps us continue to bring you great webinars. So without any further delay, I'd like to introduce Dr. Chris Winslow, who will present a HABs primer.
Thanks, Jill. How's my audio on this end?
You sound great.
Good, and you can see the slide as we need to see them.
I can see the slide.
You're awesome, Jill. Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. Thanks for the introduction, Jill. And we're going to dive right in because I want to keep this to 15 minutes so that everybody can engage with questions. And it is a primer for the HABs forecast on the 27th. I'll ask Jill while she's managing things in the background to paste the way to register for that webinar in the chat function. But really, I'm just going to talk about the harmful algal bloom research space. And so the lessons learned, the gaps we need to address. But as promised, also talk to you about where the nutrients are coming from and our goals of reaching our 40% reduction. So as far as nutrient sources today, many of you have probably seen this already, but I wanted to highlight it to level set everybody at the same place. So since the mid-70s, we have seen a tremendous decrease in the amount of phosphorus, and this is all in the Maumee River, and the amount of phosphorus coming from wastewater treatment plants, so those WWTPSs, so wastewater treatment plants. So now, if you measure phosphorus at the end of the Maumee River, only about 9% of that can actually be tied back to discharge from treated water. The other source that a lot of people mention and feel like should get some attention is CSOs. That abbreviation is for combined sewer overflows. So these are events when too much rain falls on the watershed, and all of that water, along with the water coming from our homes, goes to a wastewater treatment plant. The problem is, under these heavy storm events, our wastewater treatment plants, at least many of them, can't hold that volume of water. So they will discharge untreated wastewater into receiving water bodies. We have actually gone out as a community of scientists and measured how much phosphorus is found in those occasional CSO or combined sewer overflow discharges. And if you add those up, and I've only got 1 year example for you here, in 2013, that only accounted for about 1% of the phosphorus at the end of the river. So we need to address these combined sewer overflows. This mechanism by which we add untreated water into our water bodies because it does have things like viruses and bacteria loads in them. So it is something we need to address. But I wanted to make sure with showing you this 1% contribution of phosphorus that this is not driving our harmful algal blooms in the Western Lake Erie Basin. We do know that septic systems located in the watershed of the Maumee River contribute about 4% of all phosphorus. Thankfully, our state, the great state of Ohio, has been working to address these faulty or failing septic systems by putting out low or no interest loans for homeowners to adjust their systems. And so we know that septic is producing phosphorus that drive these blooms, but only about 4% at the mouth of the Maumee. A lot of people ask about what is the contribution of fertilizer we put on our suburban and urban lawns. Well, we have gone out and found that since 2013, Scott's Miracle-Gro has removed phosphorus from most of its fertilizers. So if you look at any bag you buy at Ace Hardware, Menards, Home Depot, Lowe's, your mom and pop store, most fertilizers will not have any phosphorus in it for your lawn. Starter fertilizer will, so if you put new seed down, that will have some phosphorus. But what we've shown is since 2013, with Scott's lead, 95% of that market, the fertilizer market, has followed their lead and is reducing or removing phosphorus from their fertilizers. So we know that this runoff from lawns, urban and suburban lawns, is a contributor, but it's not a major driving factor of our blooms. And the last thing that I want to mention on this slide, at least, is internal loading. It's a fancy term for phosphorus that's already in the lake that gets brought up from the bottom to the surface to help grow these blooms. We have gone out as a group of scientists to measure the nutrients leaving the bottom of the lake, moving up in the water or in the water column. And depending on the year, only 3 to 7% of the phosphorus already in Lake Erie drives a bloom in a given year. So if you add all these numbers up, 9 and 1 and 4 and 3 to 7%, it's about 20-ish% of the phosphorus is coming from these. What it tells us is that the rest is coming from what we call non-point sources. So it is just runoff from the landscape after a rain event. So it's not coming from a pipe, it's not coming from septic, those sorts of things. And if you look at the Maumee River Basin, so the watershed that drains into the Maumee and ultimately drains into the Western Lake Erie Basin, is predominantly ag. And that's not a negative thing. This is what's helped make Ohio the great state that it is. But what it says is that a lot of the nutrients you're losing are coming from ag-related land use. So it's not to point a finger at ag or to farmers, but it's just to say if we're going to lower the nutrients in our system, we can address these 5 things listed here, but we also need to be talking with our producers on the landscape. So as promised, I was going to show you what the trends are over the last almost 10 years since we asked for a 40% reduction in our nutrient contributions. To do that, I got to get some terminology out for you. So the picture on the right is the Maumee River watershed. So this is all the land that drains into the Maumee River here at Lake Erie. So we measure at this site approximately total phosphorus. So we take a water sample that's kind of muddy in color here, and that tells us the total phosphorus. But we can break that down into 2 components, which are important for you to understand. The first is dissolved phosphorus. So that phosphorus that we run through a filter that results in clear water. And so this clear water has phosphorus in it, but it's dissolved. Just like you would dissolve sugar in your coffee, you don't taste that granulated sugar, it's dissolved. But then there is phosphorus that gets stuck to organisms and sediment, and that's what is particulate P, or particulate phosphorus. So this is a filter that this water was run through, the dissolved is in here, and the particulate is here. So to address the issues in Lake Erie, specifically the harmful algal bloom issue, we need to know what these things look like. So what is happening to dissolved phosphorus through time, and what is happening to particulate phosphorus. So I'm going to show you some figures on the next slide, but I'll walk you through them slowly, but it's related to do these 2 parts. Dissolved phosphorus out of this total jar, and particulate phosphorus out of this total jar. So the first one's particulate phosphorus. Before I put data up on these, I want to explain what you're looking at. So this is year on the bottom. So this is called the x-axis. So there'll be a dot that shows up from every year from basically the 70s to roughly present day. And what you're looking at on the vertical is concentration. So how much particulate phosphorus is in that water? So here's the dots for you. So what you're seeing is that we're seeing a decline in the amount of particulate phosphorus. There's a little bit of a bump up here, but since the 70s, we've seen a decline. And a lot of this can be tied back to conservation tillage or no tillage practices. What I want to highlight though is this gray line just below 0.2 is the target that we want to be at. Next, I'm going to show you dissolved phosphorus. All of the dissolved phosphorus that we measure is available for these algal species, these harmful algal blooms, to use to grow. Same thing, year on the bottom, and concentration on the vertical, and each blue dot is a specific year. You can see that after we did the Clean Water Act, the dissolved phosphorus dropped below the target line. So again, this gray line, and was down there until the early 2000s. But since the year 2000, this has crept up a little bit and it's higher in nature. You can see a downward trend that we've been seeing since, I would argue, 2014, 2015. So things are progressing towards a 40% reduction, but we are not at our target. So I say there's good signs out there. We are seeing some data that suggests the numbers are coming down, but not statistically so yet. So to get to where we need to be, I argue that we need to do 3 different approaches. One is how farmers interact with phosphorus in a given day. So following what are called the 4 R's, the right rate, right time, right placement, and right source of the nutrients they apply in their fields. But also we need to worry about phosphorus that's in those fields from applications from 3, 4, 5 decades ago. So we are looking at what we call legacy P, or P that was applied not in a given planting season, but in a previous year. And the last thing I'll mention is that the reason why we're seeing a lot more of this nutrients is not only because we're losing it from the landscape, but because rain in this part of the country is increasing under climate change. And so we need to also, in order to get to a 40% reduction, figure out how we better manage water runoff from our fields and from our urban and suburban areas. I'm going to really blow through this last part because this is a primer for the HABs forecast that will be Thursday of next week, so the 27th. But I'm going to highlight the Harmful Algal Bloom Research Initiative. It is jointly run by the University of Toledo and Ohio State University, specifically Sea Grant and Stone Laboratory, and it's funded by the Ohio Department of Higher Education. What I'm showing you on this slide is that this initiative, funding this research and identifying which research needs to be done, is driven by multiple agencies. So I highlight the Department of Ag and all the players that have been involved from agriculture, the Department of Health. On the next slide, I also highlight the fact that we talked to the Department of Natural Resources, the Ohio EPA, and the Ohio Lake Erie Commission. All 5 of these agencies tell Ohio Sea Grant and the University of Toledo what research questions they want answered. And so again, I'm going to go through this real quickly. I hope that encourages you to join our HABs forecast because I will dive into this more on that forecast. So the successes. This has been around since 2015, and it's been a statewide response. I would argue the research we're funding now is actually helping these agencies inform the use of H2 Ohio funds. So this is Governor DeWine's H2 Ohio Water Quality Initiative initiated in 2019. To give you an example of that, the research we're doing under HABRI, so this research initiative, is informing wetland placement and construction money that's going to the Department of Natural Resources through H2 Ohio. It's also informing things like manure incorporation and cover crops and voluntary nutrient management plans that the Ohio Department of Agriculture is helping farmers deploy, again, under the H2 Ohio program. Again, this whole thing is to help agencies prevent and manage algal issues. So far, 97 projects have been funded, and I would argue it's positioning Ohio as a leader in this space. Arguably, because of H2 Ohio and this Harmful Algal Bloom Research Initiative, we have elevated Ohio's role in the water quality discussions that are going on. So the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement through the International Joint Commission and also the Western Basin Partnership. I have actually been asked to DC to talk about funding. This is the Harmful Algal Bloom and Hypoxia Research Control Act. I was actually invited to review this program, this research program, to see how it's helping out with addressing the harmful algal bloom issue. Just a table that shows you the number of projects. So this column here, what year they were funded in, and the amount of funding that went out. Not on this table is our recent release. So we are funding 2024 through 2026 projects. So this is fiscal year 2024 and 2025, 17 projects to the tune of $5 million. Just want to tell you about how the process occurred through the review for the most recent one. So for FY 24-25, we saw 52 different proposals from researchers in December of this past year. 31 of those proposals were asked to write a robust, detailed, full proposal. And once those proposals were written, myself, working with the state agencies and the University of Toledo, we modified those proposals. So we added questions, we adjust budgets, and we dropped and added objectives. So it was a lot of interaction between the researchers and the agencies to find out what we should fund. Those new awards, the ones we're talking about here, 17 of them started on March 1st. And there was $8 million in asks. So if we funded all 52 proposals, it would have been $8 million. When all was said and done, we were able to give out $5 million, and you can see the average award to those researchers was about $266,000. These are the universities that are being funded in this round, but I would show you these are the universities that have been funded since the start of the Harmful Algal Bloom Research Initiative. So there are, I believe, 15 dots on this map. So the research helping us out with HABs and helping our agencies out, it's not just coming from one institution in Ohio, it's coming from many. Real quickly, going to highlight these again because I want to dive into these on our HABs forecast, which is coming up. If you can't join that webinar in real time, that will also be recorded. So these are the four focus areas that we fund our research in. The first one is how do we track blooms from their source? So why do blooms grow when they grow? Why do they stop growing? When are they toxic? When are they not toxic? So we're answering these higher questions. Are they toxic or non-toxic? Can we predict when they're going to show up? How do we tie them to specific storm events? Are those toxins at the surface of the water or at the bottom of it? We also fund a lot of projects in what we call produce safe drinking water. This is really to give those treatment facilities effective and cost-efficient ways to remove those toxins so that we as consumers of that water aren't at risk of health effects. And then also there's a lot of new techniques. So not just using filters and what's called carbon, but can we use ozone and can we use UV radiation to destroy these toxins? The next slide is the detailed projects from the tracking from bloom sources. I am not going to dive in this today, but you will have access to this webinar. All of these things highlighted in this slide are specific projects that are ongoing right now. Again, I'm not going to dive into all 7 of these, but I wanted you to know there's a great breadth within this idea or this focus area, the tracking the blooms. Same as for this slide. These are some of the water treatment projects. Here you're seeing another 7 projects currently ongoing to address how to better remove toxins from drinking water if it's pulled into those plants. So really cool stuff going in these 2 focus areas. The third focus area and fourth focus area are protecting human health. So this is really looking at what effect do these toxins have on the cells or on the person. We're actually looking at fish that swim in these waters. Are these fish storing these toxins in the edible portion of their fillets? So when we catch fish, we fillet them and eat them, are we getting exposed to toxins? And so this whole focus area is really about if the toxins are there, before they get to our drinking water plants, when they're in the surface water, what impact might they have on populations living around the lake? And the last one is engage stakeholders. This is totally here just to figure out how we slow nutrient runoff from the land into the water. So a lot of this, and you can see a picture in the bottom right, is to help farmers recognize things that they can do to slow that nutrient loss. As before, I will dive into it on the HABs forecast, but these are the projects in the human health space. So again, 8 of them listed here. So what do toxins do if they're in our bodies? And these, looks like 9 projects, are all related to how do we slow nutrient loss from ag. So we've got great projects in there that are meeting the priorities coming out of the state of Ohio. So ODNR really wants to know how to manage, construct, and identify wetlands. Ag has numerous priorities. How do we effectively manage manure? How do we subsurface place nutrients? How do we hold water back on our field through drainage retention and detention? As far as the Lake Erie Commission, they are always looking at the things that we're helping farmers through the H2 Ohio program. They want to know what are the top 10 best practices that we could be helping farmers deploy in the field. And both EPA and health really just want to know that the water we're drinking, the source water, has no toxins in it and has no health risk. So these are the priorities coming from your agencies that inform those 4 focus areas. Again, on this primer, I don't have time to dive into all the projects, but I encourage you to reach out to me directly or come to the HABs forecast on June 27th. I'm going to put this up here. This just talks about the investment in matching dollars coming from the universities on these grants, how many students have been trained, how many publications have come out, how many universities. This is now updated. This is 15 universities across the state have been working on this. So with that, Jill, I know I'm a little like a minute and a half over where I wanted to be, but it looks like we have about 10 minutes for questions. So I can leave this slide up, and I'd love to hear the questions that you're seeing come through the chat.
All right. We've gotten a lot of great questions. So let me see how many we get to and what questions Dr. Winslow isn't able to answer today. We'll post his answers on the website later. All right. So the first we've gotten quite a few questions about the sources of phosphorus. Can you talk a little bit more about what are the key sources? Where's phosphorus coming from? What are like maybe the top 2 or 3 is what people are asking.
Yeah, so I guess I can answer it in 2 different ways. I can tell you that we're getting nutrients at the mouth of the Maumee, so the end of that river, are either coming from commercial application in a given year, manure application in a given year, and then that phrase that I called legacy phosphorus, some people call it old phosphorus. So those are the 3 pools: commercial, manure, and then stuff that was applied in the past. And that stuff that was applied in the past, we cannot scientifically yet determine whether that old legacy P is manure in source or commercial store-bought fertilizer. I would say right now, if you were to look at the mouth of the Maumee, and we don't have the exact data in hand, we're working on this as we speak, I would say that the percent of the manure versus the percent of the non-manure, meaning the commercial, at the mouth of Maumee, are near equivalent to how they're applied on the acres. So about 20% of the acres in the entire Maumee River Basin gets manure application, and the other 80% is commercial application. So I would say at the mouth of the Maumee, it's close to that. I would say manure is probably slightly more than 20%. But those are the 2 major sources. And then I would just add, because I think I can get to it in this question, Jill, is that the best thing to do if you are applying fertilizer, whether it's manure or commercial, is to subsurface placement. So to band it or inject it into the soil, because most loss, if you're going to reduce your losses, the science is showing the best way, although it doesn't work in all scenarios, but the best way is typically subsurface placement of that manure. Don't put it on the surface for it to be run off via rain event.
All right, another question that we got was, can you talk a little bit about, let me get the specific question here. Can you talk a little bit about the nitrogen loading in Lake Erie?
Absolutely. And I should put this back in the slide, but when we have limited time, I try and get to it. So phosphorus is what's called the limiting nutrient. So if you add phosphorus, you will grow plants or algae. But nitrogen is equally important, and more important perhaps from a toxicity standpoint. So if you have heavy phosphorus in the lake, but no nitrogen, there's indications that the toxicity of those blooms will be less. If you have both phosphorus and nitrogen, then the likelihood of toxicity increases. So both grow harmful algal blooms. You need both phosphorus and nitrogen. Phosphorus is the limiting nutrient, and nitrogen is tied to toxicity. So although this presentation was all about phosphorus and phosphorus loading, farmers are actively engaged in reducing their nitrogen loss too, because it's tied to toxicity.
All right. We had another question that was, so let me just read this one here. Besides the fish and human health connection, is the program currently addressing impacts on fish and shellfish?
So for the shellfish, we don't have a real shellfish industry in Ohio. So that is definitely Florida, and a lot of our Gulf Coast states are worried about those toxins getting built into oysters and things like that. So that is definitely a concern from a consumption health risk through the aquaculture in mussels and clams. Not the problem here in Ohio. I will say, in general, the first attention was to fish flesh because that's the risk route to humans. But we are currently funding, and some projects have wrapped up, looking at what we call non-lethal effects on aquatic organisms. So are these toxins actually slowing the growth of fish? Is it decreasing their reproductive success? Is it changing the way they see predators or the way they digest food? So there are projects, although in their infancy, that are looking at the impacts of organisms living in the lake, not to kill them, right? So a mortality, lethality thing, but is it just changing the way they behave or function and making them less efficient? So that work is going on. It's a complicated question because there's a lot of other things in the lake that could be impacting their growth rate and their reproduction and those sorts of things. So teasing those things apart is difficult. But I appreciate the question because I want the audience to know that it's not something we've ignored. We are looking at the behavior and growth and physiology and reproduction rates of organisms in the lake when exposed to toxins.
Another question. So we've gotten quite a few questions dealing with concentrated animal feeding operations. Would you be able to talk a little bit about the influence of those, how important those are to this topic?
Oh, absolutely. So for animal operations, this is where you have, large numbers of animals in a smaller area, all right? And we're feeding those animals, and they're producing waste, and we have to find a way to distribute that waste. So there are things set up by the Ohio Department of Ag. One is the 590 standard, which basically tells farmers, you need to check your soil tests first before you apply manure. And there are recommendations within that 590 standards that tells them to apply at certain rates based on certain soil tests. So there are recommendations out by Ag to inform how we handle that manure. What a lot of folks don't understand is that if you don't have fields around your animal operation that need that phosphorus, if you have to haul that manure more than 11 miles, there is an impact to that industry, to that farmer. And so what I know is happening with discussions is a lot of people within Ag and also just farmers in general are trying to figure out how do we maybe build manure cooperatives or find ways to help producers that have animals move that manure a greater distance than they can fiscally right now. So that's one. I would say that we also need to recognize that if you apply manure and commercial fertilizer at the same rate, one does not run off more aggressively than the other. So what we're saying is that manure is actually a great resource, right? It's going to provide nutrients and not only just nitrogen and phosphorus like you can store by, but it provides organic material and trace elements and trace minerals that those crops need. So using manure is a great option. What we have to make sure is that we apply it at agronomic rate and don't over apply it. And in situations where this manure exists in a place where the soils are already heavy or already at the right rate, we need to find ways to help farmers move that manure a greater distance. So I just want to stress that manure itself isn't inherently a bad thing. The only time it becomes an issue is if it's over applied in the same place over and over again. But it's an amazing nutrient, amazing resource. It just has some logistical issues associated with it.
All right. We got a couple of questions that might be specific to a slide, and I have to say I didn't write down the slide. So one of the questions was, how were goals of 0.2 and 0.05 milligrams per liter for particulate and soluble phosphorus arrived at?
Great question. Yep, I'm trying to go back in time and find that slide, but if I can't find it, this is the one. So this number right here for particulate and this 0.05 for dissolved reactive phosphorus. So those are the targets. This has been done just by researchers. I mean, we have researchers from across the Great Lakes, even visiting scientists from outside the Great Lakes to assess this. And the reason why we can say this, that 40% reduction, it doesn't mean every year you have to drop by 40%. It means the amount of nutrients we saw coming in 2008. If we reduce that number by 40%, you get to this. Because every time we see that number, the metric tons of total phosphorus or the metric tons of dissolved reactive phosphorus, it produces a bloom that we would call normal or natural, right? These organisms, these cyanobacteria, these harmful algal blooms, have always been in the lake. They're always here. They always grow at the same time of year. It's just recently, the last 2 decades, they've grown in excess. Getting to this number, a 0.05 of dissolved reactive phosphorus, you can see the 0.18 for the particulate, it's 0.23 for total phosphorus. That is based on years that when we see those concentrations, the bloom looks like what we'd expect in a non-impacted system. So those are where the numbers are. And we've hit this, Jill, in the years that we've been tracking it. But in the years we hit our target, this 0.05 and others, is because we just had drought years. So there was not a lot of nutrients leaving the field. Where we need to get, where we want to get, is to a place where we're hitting that target, whether it's a rainy year or a dry year. But those numbers are based in science. And that science is basically we see a growth that we would expect in a quote unquote unimpacted normal ecosystem.
All right. Another question was when you were talking about subsurface placement. Question that the person had was, and sorry, I had it and now it moved. Let's see. Okay. Um, would the subsurface placement risk putting the phosphorus right into the tile systems?
That research is going on right now, right? So the idea is if you have a drain tile underneath your soil, you are just moving that nutrient closer to that drain tile so that when it rains, the nutrients go into that tile and shoot out. I would say that even if you didn't have subsurface placement, if you've ever been on a fall field in the middle or farm field in the spring or in summer when it's dry, you will get large cracks in the surface of that soil. We call them micropores and macropores and fissures. If you have nutrients even on the surface, when that soil is dry and cracks, when it rains, there are plenty of conduits already to get that nutrient from the surface, so something that you didn't subsurface placement, into those tiles and out. And so what we really just need to think about is with those drain tiles, do we let them run when there's a heavy rain event? So we are doing drainage water research right now where we're telling farmers to hold that water back in those drain tiles if it doesn't need to go off their fields, if they're not flooded. So hold the water back, let those nutrients get absorbed to the soil, and slowly let that water off. And the good thing about this subsurface placement is, right, the roots for these plants that need these nutrients aren't at the surface, they're in the soil. So it's easier for the plant to pick these nutrients up by putting them right where the roots need them, and that's the right place. So subsurface, every study we do, the best bang for our buck in nutrient management is to do subsurface placement, even though there is a risk with those drain tiles.
All right. We got several questions dealing with the H2 Ohio program and specifically with the wetland monitoring. Could you talk a little bit about how phosphorus is doing in those wetlands that are being monitored now? Is that something that you could talk about?
Absolutely, absolutely. I don't have the data in front of me, but the LEARN group, so the group that Jill mentioned in my bio, the Lake Erie Aquatic Research Network, has been contracted by the DNR to monitor the 170 plus wetlands that have been put out there. We are not in all 170 wetlands, but we are in a great subset that represents those larger wetlands. And what we've been able to see is that some wetlands do an amazing job. I've seen in some wetlands, they're drawing down 10 pounds, 8 pounds per acre of phosphorus. There are others that are only drawing down 1 or 2. Still yet, there are others that aren't drawing down any phosphorus or nitrogen. And the beauty of this project, the Learn Wetland Monitoring through the DNR under H2 Ohio, is really informing the DNR on build more wetlands like this one, because this is the one that's drawing down a lot of nutrients, build less like this one. Or the one that's not doing very good, can we go in and tweak it, modify the flow rates, modify different things, what plants are in there, those sorts of things. So what's great about the H2 Ohio Wetland Initiative and the monitoring done by Learn is that we're informing future design, construction, and management. I would also argue, on average, although averages are terrible to talk about sometimes, you lose about 1 pound of phosphorus per acre of ag land. These wetlands instantly are not losing that pound. So any ag land you can convert to a wetland, you've already saved that 1 pound per acre. But then we're now showing that these acres actually draw down more than just the 1 pound that would be lost if it was an ag field. So it is an amazing tool in the toolbox for the DNR and for the governor and for all the agencies. It is not the solution because not all wetlands function the same and belong in the same locations, but it is definitely, like subsurface placement, a great tool in the toolbox.
Another follow-up question with H2 Ohio program. As the H2 Ohio program expands, how will related studies be leveraged in other watersheds through H2 Ohio or collaborations?
Yeah, so, well, I can tell you just even outside Ohio, people are coming to Ohio because of H2 Ohio, because of the HABRI, so the Harmful Algal Bloom Research Initiative, this Ohio Department of Higher Education thing. We have a lot of answers that other states don't have, so this is amazing. But there are some of these practices. A wetland in a certain part of the Maumee River Basin does have applicability in the Muskegon River watershed or the Miami River watershed. You do have to look at the soil types because soil types are going to be different. And so Depending on the soil types, you get different absorption of different nutrients. I would argue in the Ohio River Basin, so 2/3 of Ohio dumps into the Ohio River. I would argue that we need to be as much, if not more, concentrated on nitrogen in the southern part of Ohio, because that water ultimately ends up in the Gulf of Mexico. And in the Gulf, more specifically marine systems, nitrogen is the limiting nutrient, not phosphorus. So long answer to a short question is yes, the information we're learning in the Maumee does inform behaviors outside the Maumee watershed, but there are nuances to that, picking it up from one place and moving it to another.
We had one question that was dealing with, and this might be outside of your wheelhouse here, but there was a question dealing with the tropics, whether or not the tropics have this kind of an issue with the heat. This person who was asking the question didn't think there was as much harmful algal bloom issue down in the tropics. As there, and so was just wanting to find out whether or not that was something that you knew.
Yeah, so I don't know a lot in it, but from working with colleagues and peers across the country, harmful algal blooms aren't an Ohio Lake Erie specific issue, right? We have them in Sandusky, or not, Sandusky Bay, Saginaw Bay, Green Bay, and they're now start seeing a Duluth, but even outside the Great Lakes, they're just different species. So different parts of the globe, because of different temperatures and different habitats and things like that, there are cyanobacteria. So that class of organisms, they're just different species than what we have in the Great Lakes, but it's still the same thing. It's phosphorus and nitrogen that are driving, and temperatures. These things love warm temperatures. These blooms don't show up in the fall and in the spring. They show up in the winter. So with increased precipitation, with elevated temperatures across parts of the globe, we're not the only one. China is dealing with these blooms. We're seeing stuff in some of the Rift Valley lakes of Africa. So there are other cyanobacteria issues across the globe, and even in tropical regions.
All right. We have gotten to a big chunk of the questions, but now looking at the time, let me ask you one last question, and then what other questions there are will get posted onto the website. And this is more of probably more of a general overall question that someone had, was how would you describe the current health of the lake overall?
Good question. So I don't typically use the word health. I would say condition of the lake. So I would say the problems of the past, the PCBs, the dioxins, the mercury, those things we're done a great job of addressing those. And you're seeing mercury numbers come down in the water, and you're seeing mercury numbers come down in the fish. So a lot of those historical contaminants, thumbs up to us in Ohio and the Great Lakes. We're making tremendous progress. We don't see things like, the DDT impacting our large birds, our bald eagles and things like that. The bald eagle populations are coming back. The walleye and yellow populations are phenomenal in the lake right now. So I would say the newer issues for us right now to address is excess nutrients. That has a ripple effect through the system. We always talk about HABs, but it does have a ripple effect through the system. So I think we could be doing better. The condition in the nutrient space is poor and stable right now, although maybe slightly getting better. And I would say as far as the historic contaminants, we're much, much better. We're addressing our areas of concern or our AOCs. That's great. The other thing that is on folks' radar is things like the new emerging contaminants, microplastics, pharmaceuticals. So that is still a lot of unknowns in there, but that is something that I'm keeping my eye on. The Sea Grant Stone Lab, Ohio State University College of Food, Ag, and Environmental Sciences is keeping an eye on. So in that space, there's some need for research and just some attention there. So I would say of the 5 Great Lakes, right now, Erie would be considered poor condition, but it's improving in some and either getting worse or staying stabilized in others. I would refer people, and Jill, I'll give it to you if you could put it on the website. There's what's called a State of the Lakes report. I will provide that to you. If folks want to go through it, it takes each one of the Great Lakes and measure them by 9 different criteria, and it tells you whether the lake is good, fair, or poor, and whether the conditioning is getting better, worse, or stabilizing. So please, to fill more answers for that question, I will provide Jill Gentis an IJC report, International Joint Commissions report, that she can post on the website along with his webinar.
All right. Well, with that was great, Chris. Thank you. And one last question, because I've already actually committed you to a yes on this, so tell me if this was okay. People were asking whether or not they could have your slides. You in the past have been okay with that, so I said yes. I just want to make sure that was okay.
Jill, why don't we do that? I'll save it as a PDF for you, and then you can put it on the same place where the Solic report will be in the Q&A that we didn't get to today. So yes, let's put it on that website. I love it.
Okay. All right. Well, so I have put a bunch of things into the chat for everyone to take a look at, including the HABRI report, this past report, some other HABS resources for you to take a look at. I'll also be sending those in the email with the webinar recording. So I can make sure that those additional things are in there too. I would like to then just close with thanking Dr. Winslow for his willingness to talk to us all about HABs before the big NOAA HABs forecast next week. It really was an excellent discussion. We had some really great questions, so thank you. I also wanted to remind everyone that the survey URL for this webinar is in the chat feature. So if you could take a few minutes to fill that out, that would be great. This webinar series is sponsored by Ohio Sea Grant and will continue next month with Ohio Sea Grant Extension's Sarah Orlando and Scott Hardy, as well as Ohio State's Ryan Winston, who will be discussing a collaborative project to improve stormwater management at Great Lakes marinas by implementing green infrastructure. The registration of that webinar is in the chat. Thank you again, Dr. Winslow, and all the participants on this webinar. We hope this was beneficial and hope that you'll join us again in an upcoming webinar. Thanks again, Chris. We really appreciate it.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Everyone have a great week.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.